Hello, everybody. Our book today is The Nutcracker. I know, right? A lot of people have heard of The Nutcracker, maybe watched the movie, read a book, or even went to the ballet. So today we're going to read about it. The illustrations are by Lisbeth Zwerger. It's a chapter book, so take your time. The Nutcracker, a foreword. Christmas Eve was here at last. Little Marie Stahlbaum and her brother Fritz had been waiting for hours in the dimly lit room next to the sitting room. What presents would they find waiting for them under the tree this year? Marie's doll, Trudy, badly needed a new dress. And at last the time had come. Lovely, soft music reached the children's ears, and they felt as if wings were fluttering in the air around them. There was no doubt about it. The Christ child had just flown past. Then, tingling, tingling, the big double doors opened. The bright light from the sitting room shone in the children's eyes. Dazed, they hesitated in the doorway for a moment, and then ran to the Christmas tree. Oh, 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 Marie kept crying, and Fritz jumped for joy. What fine presents he had! Marie found a doll's tea set and a new doll, and immediately decided to call her Clara. Fritz was delighted with his brightly painted toy soldiers. Both children had presents of picture books and sugar candy, and there was a wonderful mechanical toy made by their godfather, Counselor Drosselmeyer himself. He gave them one every year. This time it was a magnificent castle with a tiny chandelier hanging in it, burning real candles. And the little doll was waving from one window. But you couldn't really play with the castle, so Fritz soon laid up his soldiers on parade, while Marie went on looking at all her own presents. Suddenly, she saw the figure of a little man under the tree. He wasn't very showy, so she had missed seeing him before. His head was almost as big as his spindly body, which made him look rather odd. But to make up for that, he wore a pretty little coat and had a beautiful white beard. There was a kind, friendly expression in his pale green eyes. "Oh," said Marie, "whose is that dear little man?" "He's going to crack hard nuts for us," said her father. "He belongs to all of us. But if you like him so much, I'll let you look after him. Take good care of the nutcracker." Marvels and Wonders. It was late, and everyone else had gone to bed, but Marie had to look after her new friend, Nutcracker. Fritz had made him crack such hard nuts that 3 of his little teeth were missing, and his jaw was broken. Now she had found him a place to spend the night in the glass-fronted cupboard where all the toys were kept. "Clara," she told her new doll, "I'm sorry, but I must put you on the sofa. Poor Nutcracker needs your soft bed tonight." Clara looked a little hurt, but she said not a word. So Marie carefully put Nutcracker to bed, tucked him up gently in a pretty ribbon from her own dress, and was just about to close the cupboard when she heard sounds. They came softly, softly, a whispering, a murmuring, a rustling, behind the stove, behind the chairs, behind the cupboards, and all around. The clock on the wall ticked louder and louder, and the big gilded owl on top of it. How like Godfather Drosselmeyer that owl suddenly looked, bent down, and hummed quite distinctly, "Clucks, cluck, clucks, cluck, tick, tick, tock, tick, tick, tock. The Mouse King's ears will hear your song, so sing it loud and sing it long. Chime, clock, clock, chime. Midnight is the witching time." Then there was a great deal of laughing and whistling, and Marie saw little lights twinkling in every nook and cranny of the room. But they weren't lights at all, they were shining eyes. A mouse was peering out of every crevice and corner, and soon there was a whole army of mice in the room. They looked sweet, Marie thought, until suddenly, right in front of her, the floor opened up with a loud creak. Sand and earth flew in all directions, and a mouse with 7 heads wearing 7 crowns appeared. The 7-headed mouse squeaked 3 times, and then the whole mouse army marched against the glass-fronted cupboard. In her fright, Marie put her arm through one of the glass panes. There was a tinkling sound, and she felt a sharp pain in her arm. At least the noise had scared the mice away. But what was happening now? A light came on in the cupboard behind Marie, and there was a great deal of noise. The toy chimney sweeps, the zither players, a drummer boy, and many other dolls were running up and down, waving their arms about, and Marie clearly heard Nutcracker's voice call, "Dear friends and brothers, will you stand by me in battle against the mice?" The battle. "Awake, awake, we go to fight. This very night we go to fight. Awake, awake, a warlike sight," came the war cry from the cupboard, and one by one the toy soldiers climbed out of their boxes, while Nutcracker took a bold leap and jumped into the drawer at the bottom of the cupboard. "Strike up a march to summon the troops, my faithful drummer boy," he shouted, and the army marched out with banners flying and a loud fanfare. At the same time, a squeaking and squealing could be heard in the room. The eyes of hordes of mice were flashing, and the dreadful 7-headed mouse towered above them all. Bang, bang, bang went the guns of Nutcracker's army as they fired sugar plums and ginger nuts at the mice. But more and more mice came, taking good aim and slinging white pills at the toy soldiers. All was in confusion. The Mouse King and his mice kept squeaking, and now and then Nutcracker's powerful voice rang out. Some of the cavalry bravely threw themselves into battle, but Fritz's hussars were not quite so bold. The ugly, evil-smelling bullets fired at them by the mice soiled their smart suits, and they swerved aside and ran away. It wasn't long before a great troop of mice was putting the other soldiers to fight too. Nutcracker, with a last little loyal band of toys, was fighting desperately in front of the glass-fronted cupboard. Then up came the Mouse King, with his 7 mouths uttering 7 cries of triumph. "Oh, my poor Nutcracker," sobbed Marie, and without stopping to think, she threw her left shoe into the army of mice, aiming straight for their king. At that moment, all fell still, and everyone seemed to have scattered and fled. Sick in bed. The sun shone brightly through the window, which was frosted up outside, when Marie opened her eyes, she was looking at her mother's anxious face. "Oh, have those ugly mice gone away?" asked Marie. "And is Nutcracker safe?" "My goodness, Marie," said her mother, "what does our Nutcracker have to do with mice? But perhaps it was a mouse that frightened you yesterday and made you put your arm through the glass of the cupboard door. Thank goodness I woke at midnight and discovered that you weren't in bed. And where did I find you? Lying there, bleeding and holding the Nutcracker with the toy soldiers scattered around you, and your left shoe in the middle of them all." "Oh, mother," cried Marie, "that was the great battlefield where the toys and the mice had been fighting." "Now, Marie, do calm down," said her mother gently. "All the mice have gone away, and the Nutcracker safe in the cupboard." Marie was running a high temperature, and she had to stay in bed for several days. But she knew that Nutcracker had been rescued, and sometimes, as if in a dream, she thought she heard him say, "Marie, dear lady, I owe you so much, but you can do even more for me." What might that be? Marie couldn't solve the puzzle. Then, one afternoon, when she was bored with being sick in bed, the door opened and in came Godfather Drosselmeyer. "I wanted to see how the poor invalid is doing," he said. "Godfather Drosselmeyer," Marie burst out, "why didn't you come down from the clock and help Nutcracker?" "Marie!" cried her horrified mother. But her godfather only made a very odd face and hummed, "Clocks, clock, tick, tick, tock. To join the fight would not be right." "Mr. Drosselmeyer," said her mother sternly. Marie's godfather quickly sat down on the edge of her bed and whispered, "Oh, I would happily have pecked out all the mouse's king's 14 eyes, but that would never do. Here's something nice. See what I brought you?" And saying that, he produced Nutcracker. He had repaired his jaw and given him nice new teeth. Marie shouted for joy, and her godfather smiled. "He's no beauty," he told the child, "but if you like, I'll tell you why he looks that way. Or do you know the tale of Princess Pirlipat already?" "No," said Marie, and she and Chiffry and Fritz, who had come into the room too, both cried, "Tell us, Godfather Drosselmeyer, tell us the story." The Tale of the Hard Nut. When Princess Pirlipat came into the world, her father, the king, was beside himself with joy. "Hooray!" he kept crying. "Did anyone ever see anything lovelier than my little Pirlipatty?" And all the ministers, generals, and high-ranking officers agreed with him. It was a fact that there had never been a prettier child than Princess Pirlipat. Her little face might have been woven of silk, as white as a lily and as red as a rose. Her eyes were sparkling azure blue, and her hair was like curly gold thread. Furthermore, Pirlipat had come into the world complete with 2 rows of pearly little teeth. And 2 hours after she was born, she bit the Lord Chancellor with them. Everyone was happy except for the Queen, who seemed anxious and uneasy. She had the child carefully guarded, and 6 ladies in waiting had to sit in her room at night, each with a cat on her lap. No one knew why, but I'm about to tell you. It so happened that a little while before the baby's birth, a great feast of sausages had been held at the court of Pirlipat's father. The king loved nothing more than sausages, so the queen herself presided over the golden pan in which they were cooking. When she came to the most important part of the sausage making, frying the bacon, a tiny little whisper of a voice was heard. "Give me some bacon, sister. I want to join the feast. I'm a queen myself." The queen knew who the speaker was at once, Mistress Mousie, who claimed to be ruler of the land of Musolia. The queen was happy to oblige her, but no sooner had she offered her a little bacon than up scurried Mistress Mousie's whole huge family, including her 7 big bad sons, and they all wanted to share in the banquet. The mistress of ceremonies shooed the gang of mice away, but too late. "Not enough bacon," said the king when he sat down to eat his sausages, and the feast was quite spoiled for him. The king swore revenge, and that revenge was to be taken by his court clockmaker, Christian Elias Drosselmeyer. Yes, his name was just the same as mine. Using fried bacon as bait, the clockmaker set mouse traps to get rid of Mistress Mousie and all of her people forever. In spite of all clever Mistress Mousie's warnings, mouse after mouse came to a sad end in the traps. Mistress Mousie herself was so grief-stricken that she left her kingdom. But before turning her back on the royal court, she told the queen, "My sons are dead, so take care, Madame Queen. Take care that Queen Mousie doesn't bite your own little princess in two." More of the tale of the hard nut. One night, one of Princess Pirlipat's ladies-in-waiting happened to wake from a deep sleep at midnight. She saw an ugly great mouse sitting beside the baby's head and jumped up with a shriek which alarmed the cats in the room. They tried to catch Mistress Mousie, for it was she, but in vain. She had disappeared. All the noise made the Pirlipat wake up crying. "Thank heaven," cried the ladies-in-waiting, "she's alive." But what had happened to Pirlipat? Her pretty angelic face was all shapeless now. Her graceful body was crooked. Her blue eyes were green and staring, and her little mouth stretched from ear to ear. The queen was ready to die of grief, and the king's room had to be lined with padded wallpaper because he kept knocking his head against the wall and wailing, "Oh, what an unhappy monarch I am!" In his misery, the king summoned the court clockmaker. "Christian Elias Drosselmeyer," he said, "for you'll remember that the court clockmaker shared my name. Cure the princess, or you must die." Drosselmeyer shed bitter tears, while the princess happily cracked nut after nut. A nut, though, the court clockmaker suddenly. "That's the clue." "A nut," thought the court clockmaker suddenly. "That's the clue. Hadn't the princess come into the world with teeth in her head already? And since her transformation, hadn't she shown a remarkable craving for nuts?" In his excitement, Drosselmeyer went to see his best friend, the court astronomer, who cast the princess's horoscope. It was very complicated, for the lines of fate were tangled and difficult to decipher. But in the end, all was clear. To be as beautiful as before, the princess must eat the sweet kernel of the Krakatuk nut. The Krakatuk nut. Once a young man had cracked it with his own teeth and handed it to her with his eyes closed. Then he must take 7 steps backward, and only then might he open his eyes again. The king was delighted. His daughter would have her beauty back, But where in the world was the Crackatuck nut to be found, or a young man who could crack it with his teeth? For that nut had such a hard shell that a 48-pounder cannon could roll over it without cracking its shell. The queen thought of advertising for such a young man in the newspapers. The king's idea was to send the court clockmaker and the court astronomer to find the Krakana where it might be. So they're going to find the Krakatak nut. The Krakatak nut. Oh, at the end of the tale of the hard nut. Drosselmeyer and the astronomer had been journeying around the world for 15 years when they both felt homesick all of a sudden. So they came straight back from Asia to Nuremberg, where the court clockmaker cousins lived, a doll maker called Christoph Zacharias Drosselmeyer. Said the doll maker, I think I can help you. And he showed them a gilded nut that he had bought years ago at a very high price from a strange nut seller. They made haste to rub the gilding off, and underneath they clearly saw the name of the nut written in Chinese characters saying Krakatak. Good things seldom come singly, said the astronomer. The stars tell me that we've found not only the nut, but the young man to crack it. He's your cousin's son. The cousin's son was a handsome youth who used to stand in his father's workshop, very kindly cracking nuts for the girls. You hardly noticed that he had once been a jumping jack. When news that the nut had been found became known, many young men, trusting in their strong jaws, tried to break the spell on the princess. But one after another, they found it was their teeth they broke instead. Then young Drosselmeyer presented himself. He broke the nutshell with a single crack and handed it to the princess with his eyes closed. No sooner had she eaten the kernel than she turned into a lovely young woman of angelic beauty. To fulfill the prophecy, all young Drosselmeyer had to do now was take 7 steps back. He had taken 6, but at the 7th he stumbled over Mistress Mousie, and oh, what a misfortune! Now he looked just as the princess had looked before. Nutcracker sly, squeaked the dying mouse, soon you must die. My death will be avenged. Don't doubt, my mouse king's son will pay you out. When the princess saw how young Drosselmeyer had been transformed, she was so horrified that the man who had saved her was banished from court along with his 2 companions. The stars had failed to tell the astronomer about that, but he cast a new horoscope and discovered that young Drosselmeyer would be prince and then king someday. That is, if he could defeat Mistress Mousie's 7-headed son and win the love of a lady in spite of his old and odd looks. There, dear children, Godfather Drosselmeyer ended his story. Now you know why people so often say that was a hard nut to crack, and why nutcrackers are so ugly. Uncle and nephew. At last, Marie was allowed to get up again, and she hurried to the glass-fronted cupboard. There stood her dear Nutcracker. I'll take care of you, she whispered to him. But oh dear, why didn't your uncle help you? When Godfather Drosselmeyer next came to tea, she told him to his face, Now I know you're the banished court clockmaker, and Nutcracker is your nephew, and at war with Mistress Mousie's son. Why don't you help him? The whole family laughed at Marie. What strange fancies she took into her head. But her godfather whispered to her, "Ah, you alone can save him." Not long after that, Marie heard a loud noise in her room one night. "Oh, that mice! The mice are coming back," she cried in alarm, unable to move, eyes and crowns flashing. The mouse king burrowed through a hole in the wall, and with a mighty bound he landed on Marie's little bedside table. "You must give me your sugar plums and marzipan," he squealed, "or I'll bite your little nutcracker in two." In the morning, Marie's mother said in surprise, "I don't know how the mice get into our living room. Poor Marie, just look, they've eaten all your marzipan." Marie didn't mind. Nutcracker was safe now, she thought. But next night there was a squeaking and a squealing in her ears again. "Give me your sugar dollies, or I'll bite Nutcracker in two." When Marie's mother found the nibbled dollies next day, she cried, "There must be a horrible mouse at large here." And she set a mouse trap baited with fried bacon. But even that didn't help. The next night, Marie heard squealing again. "Hand them over, your books and your dress. I must have them. Oh, yes, if you will not let them go, I'll bite Nutcracker in two." "Oh, dear me," wailed Marie next morning. "What am I to do?" She went to the glass-fronted cupboard and took out Nutcracker. In her arms, he began to get warm and to move. "A sword," he whispered creakily. "A sword." Marie jumped for joy. At last she knew how to help him. She borrowed a sword from Fritz's soldiers. She could hardly sleep next night. She was so anxious. There was a lot of noise outside, then a squeak, and then came a knock at the door. "Dear Mrs. Talbot," she heard a voice outside call. "Good news! The wicked Mouse King is defeated." It sounded just like young Mr. Drosselmeyer, but when the door opened, it was Nutcracker who entered and gave Marie 7 little golden crowns. Victory. "Only your help," said Nutcracker, "gave me courage and strength for the battle. As a way of thanking you, I would like to show you some wonderful things. Will you follow me?" "I will certainly go with you," said Marie, "but it mustn't be far, and it mustn't take long, because I haven't had my night's sleep yet." "In that case," he replied, "I'll choose the nearest way, although it's a little difficult." He led Marie over to the massive old wardrobe in the hall of the house. The door of the wardrobe was open, and Nutcracker clambered nimbly up the ornamental carving. Once he had scaled the wardrobe, he pulled the tassel, and the pretty little stairway came down through the sleeve of Father's overcoat. "Just keep climbing up, dear young lady," said Nutcracker. Marie did as he said. No sooner had she emerged from the top of the sleeve than bright light shone on her face, and she found that she was standing in a wonderfully fragrant meadow full of sparkling precious stones. "This is Rock Candy Meadow," said Nutcracker. Together they went through a gateway made of almonds and raisins, with a gallery above it where 6 little monkeys in red jackets were playing music. To the sound of their beautiful tunes, Nutcracker and Marie went on into the little wood with wonderful scents wafting out of it. The land of toys. Golden fruit hung from bright branches in the wood, shining and sparkling among the leaves. The trees had decked themselves out with ribbons and bunches of flowers, like merry wedding guests and bridesmaids. And at every breath of wind there was a rustling in the branches and leaves, and tinsel crackled and crinkled with a cheerful musical sound. Oh, it's lovely, cried Marie, delighted. We are in Christmas Wood, said Nutcracker. Can we stay here for a little while? Asked Marie. Nutcracker clapped his hand, and immediately along came a number of shepherds and shepherdesses, hunters and huntresses. They were so white and delicate that they might have been made of pure sugar. Marie sat in an armchair to watch them performing a beautiful ballet. After the dancing, they went on past Orange Brook, which smelled delicious, past Lemonade Cascade, and finally along the slow flowing Honey River. Picturesque gingerbread village lay on its bank. They walked through a little town of bright translucent houses made of sugar candy, and beyond it they came to Rose Lake, where silver waves splashed melodiously. Oh, how lovely, cried Marie. It might have been made by Godfather Drosselmeyer himself. No, no, dear young lady, said Nutcracker. My uncle can't make anything as good as this. You do it much better. He clapped his hands, and two boats in the shape of shells, drawn by dolphins, came toward them. They glided gently across the lake in the shell shaped boats. The capital city. What a sight met Marie's eyes on the opposite bank, and how can I describe it to you? Beyond the glittering bushes and magnificent beds of flowers rose the capital city, with walls and towers in wonderful hues. And as for the shape of the houses, nothing like them was to be seen anywhere else on earth. They were so unusual. As they passed through the city gate, the soldiers presented arms. Welcome, dear prince, they cried. Welcome to Candy City. Marie was surprised to find the Nutcracker was a prince here, and even more surprised by the happy chatter, the rejoicing, and laughter in all the streets. Dear young lady, explained Nutcracker, this is nothing unusual. Candy City is a merry town. It's like this every day. Suddenly, a dignified man made his way through the crowd. Confectioner, confectioner, he kept shouting, and at once the noise died down a little. What was that about? Asked Marie. Confectioner is the name of an unknown but terrible power. It can make the people of Candy City into anything it likes. It and Giant Sweet Tooth are the only threat to our city. Suddenly, Marie and Nutcracker were standing in front of a castle bathed in glowing pink light with hundreds of fantastic turrets. This is Marzipan Castle, said Nutcracker, leading Marie through the entrance. Inside, four princesses in beautiful dresses were waiting for Nutcracker. How have you been? They asked as they welcomed their brother. Nutcracker took Marie's hand. This, he said, is Miss Marie Stallbaum, who saved my life. If she hadn't thrown her shoe and then found me a sword, the terrible Mouse King would have bitten me in two. And he told the whole story from the beginning, the toy soldiers in the battle, the Mouse King's blackmail of Marie, and her brave defiance. But the more he talked, the further away his voice seemed to be. It seemed to Marie as if faint veils of mist were rising, and the princesses and Nutcracker were dissolving in the mist. A strange singing and whirring and humming was heard, And as if on rolling waves, Marie rose higher and higher and higher. The end. Marie fell from a great height. Then she was lying in her bed in broad daylight, and there stood her mother saying, "How can anyone sleep so long?" Marie must have fallen asleep in Marzipan Castle and been carried home. She told her mother all about her adventures and the sights she had seen. "Marie," said her mother, "you've had a lovely long dream, but now put it out of your head. Look," and she went over to the glass-fronted cupboard. "There's your beloved Nutcracker, and he can't move." No one would believe Marie's story, but the pictures of the wonderful fairy kingdom remained vivid in her mind, and she kept looking dreamily at the glass-fronted cupboard. "Oh, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer," she said one day, "if only you were really alive, I wouldn't scorn you as Princess Pirlipat did, never mind whether you were ugly or not." At that moment, there was such a bang and a jolt that Marie fainted away and fell off her chair. When she came to, she heard her mother calling, "Marie, we have visitors." There stood her godfather, and behind him, a handsome young man in a red and gold coat, his nephew from Nuremberg. He showed how well brought up he was by bringing pretty presents, a sword for Fritz, and for Marie, sugar dolls, just like those that the Mouse King had nibbled. And at dinner, he cracked nuts for everyone. Crack! And the nutshells were open. After dinner, he asked Marie to show him the glass fronted cupboard. "Most excellent Miss Stahlbaum," he said, falling on his knees before her. "The moment you said you wouldn't scorn me like mean-minded Princess Pirlipat, I returned to my old shape. Dear young lady, give me your hand and make me happy. Share my crown and kingdom and come to Marzipan Castle with me." "Dear Mr. Drosselmeyer," replied Marie, "you are a kind man and you rule a lovely country. I will happily marry you." So, now Marie was engaged to marry young Mr. Drosselmeyer, and a year later he came to fetch her in his golden coach drawn by silver horses. They say that to this day she is queen of the land where you may see glittering Christmas woods, translucent marzipan castles, and the most wonderful and beautiful things, if only you have eyes for them. And that's the end of the tale of Nutcracker and the Mouse King. The end.